Hello, Mind Bloomers. This is Mind Bloom, the safe space at the intersection of mental health advocacy and breast cancer awareness. Mind Bloom is your podcast. Subscribe to hear more on female entrepreneurship and the juggling of family life, career goals, and romantic relationships. Not an easy task, especially if your physical and mental health need a big hug right now. Hello, Mind Bloomers. This is Marina G, your host, and welcome to Mind Bloom, the podcast for all things mental health and breast cancer awareness. Before we dive into this week's episode, let me just say that Mind Bloom, the podcast, and the content at Mind Bloom U across all platforms is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should always contact your providers for medical counsel. Never disregard any medical treatment or delay seeking professional help because of any content authored or distributed by Mind Bloom. Hi guys, hello. Welcome to episode 22 of Mind Bloom. This is the bonus episode of week 3 of October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I cannot begin to tell you how excited I am to introduce you to Tammey Grable-Woodford. She is the host of the podcast Your Killer Life. I'm a personal fan of the show, and not just that, I am a personal fan of Tammey. We are good friends. We check in on each other frequently. We vent about the demands of social media. We ask each other questions about, how do I tweet? What does this even mean? How the heck does Instagram work? And as we do this, we learn, we're learning, and we're blooming in our relationship, our friendship across the country. So if you haven't yet, please go check out Your Killer Life. It's a bi-weekly podcast on all things breast cancer. Tammey and her guests talk not only about diagnoses, treatment, courses of treatment and outcomes, new clinical trials, new studies and research. Tammey will also frequently bring on surgeons, physicians, naturopaths as well, basically champions for holistic treatment and for viewing the patient, the individual, as a whole person that should be treated with respect and courtesy. Your Killer Life focuses as well on mental health and on sexuality, sensuality, the touch and the loss thereof after surgery and after breast cancer. And we share this advocacy for saying things as they are and for breaking taboos and debunking myths and just bringing down the stigma around these difficult conversations. They're difficult, sure, yes, but they should be had, these conversations. Tammey was diagnosed over 5 years ago with stage 3B invasive lobular carcinoma. And like so many other people diagnosed with breast cancer, she had no idea what she was in for. She did not know that there are different types of breast cancer. She did not know what the different stages were. And she certainly could not believe that she had a mass of 6 centimeters that was not palpable inside one of her breasts. So as with most of the diagnoses, Tammey underwent a double mastectomy with breast mount reconstruction. And she declined radiotherapy and chemotherapy, as well as hormonal therapy, tamoxifen. And she is, to this day, as she likes to call herself, a cancer thriver. She is thriving. She is not just living. She's not just surviving. She is not just mindlessly waking up and doing what she has to do and go back to sleep, and the next day the same thing. No, she is living her dreams. She is chasing her goals. She's changing lives. She's changed mine for sure. She is impacting the life of breast cancer patients as well as breast cancer caretakers and loved ones. You'll notice that the interview is in a very conversational, very informal tone. It's almost like we feed off each other and we always have something more to say and something more to add. And Tammey is just so insightful and self-aware that we could just talk for hours and hours. In fact, for this interview, we spoke for almost 2 hours. And I have to say, it was not easy, Tammey, to break down a 2-hour conversation into 45 minutes. But I would do it again and again and again. This was so much fun. It was so enlightening. I learned so much, and I still do every single day. So stay tuned for more. We'll be talking about self-advocacy. We're going to be talking about the aftermath of breast surgery and what doctors and surgeons not always tell you, and about the true big fear behind a breast cancer diagnosis, not only for ourselves, but for the caretakers, the people that surround us. It's ultimately the fear of mortality, of our own mortality, and more often than not, the acknowledgement from the people around us of their own mortality. So these are all complicated topics to broach, but Tammey does it in such a light, insightful way. It's a pleasure to hear her take on these subjects. Guys, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Turns out it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. It will also distribute your podcast for you so that everyone can listen to it on Spotify and Apple Podcast and many, many more. And guess what? You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So go download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started. Right. And I think actually that our podcast and just our role in lives complements itself very well. Because you give us all the facts and all the numbers and all the things. And I just bring people to tears. No, because, and I just try to, and we both do, it's just different ways, I think, of achieving it. We just try to unmask this whole thing. We just try to call the things by their names. And just break the taboo and bring down the taboo and the stigma as much as possible. Not only in terms of breast cancer and breast cancer treatments and clinical trials and post-surgery options, whatever, but also in terms of mental health.
Yes.
Because one does not go without the other. And you could tell me more about this. So Tammey, tell us a little bit about you, about why you started your Killer Life, which is an amazing podcast, and who you are in general. Why don't you?
Who I am is an ongoing work in progress, I tell you. And that became apparently abundantly clear after being diagnosed with cancer. So I, back in 2014, had finished my master's in business from the University of Washington. I had a job that I absolutely loved. I had run for state representative and had been busy ticking off the boxes of success as it's defined in our society. And fast forward to February of 2015, and I had noticed some changes in my breast, and enough that the changes were ongoing enough that I made an appointment. And turns out I had stage 3B ILC that was estrogen progesterone positive, and later found out that it was also had metastasized to the nipple, so to the dermis, as well as to my lymphatic system. So that was sort of the birth of my blog, which is Killer Left Boob. And that was the original blog. And that blog, I started blogging from the day I was diagnosed. And part of that, honestly, was to just get me in the right frame of mind on a daily basis. So I would kind of wake up and process the information, because I really, when you're first diagnosed with cancer, at least for me, it felt like every day was, what do I need to learn today? And what decision do I need to make today that is going to provide me with the optimal outcome as defined by me as I walk through this process. So blogged through the whole thing and actually started a book. I have a publisher. I have half a manuscript done, and I owe an answer to one of my listeners and longtime supporters, Vanessa, who keeps asking me when the book is going to be done, and I don't have the answer for that yet. But instead of getting that book completely finished, I felt really compelled to launch Your Killer Life. So Killer Left Boob was the blog. I went from Killer Left Boob from a killer diagnosis to a killer life. And that is where I ended up with Your Killer Life for the podcast. And the podcast itself, and I love that you're podcasting about this as well, it really is to break those taboos, bring information, talk about all the really real things when it comes to breast cancer. Because one of the things I noticed is that once I was diagnosed, the moment I was diagnosed, in my mind, I had all of the images that media gives me about women who have breast cancer. And it's not a healthy image. It's not a happy image. It is a very sad, sorrowful image that is utilized to raise money for the cause, for research, etc. And then upon my diagnosis, I had all of these amazing women and people that would kind of step out of their life and say, hey, I have cancer too. I had cancer too. And I realized that there is this secret, not so secret club of people who have gone through this and who are truly alive and thriving in their diagnosis. And that gave me the hope that I needed. And so I really wanted to start sharing those stories, breaking the taboos, and showing a different side of how we are all walking through and not just surviving, but thriving and vibrant in the diagnosis that we have.
Yes, that is so powerful. Yeah. And that was the first episode I ever listened from your podcast, The Secret, Not So Secret Club. And remember, I sent you a voice text. I was like, Tammey, I can't even believe you took the words out of my mouth and out of my mind, because I wouldn't even say them to myself. That there are silver linings, that there are discoveries, there is growth, and there is a community that all of a sudden just appears out of nowhere, of other people who want to help and to want to just share and talk about things and call them by their names. It's unbelievable. And you were also talking about, thriving with cancer, not just surviving, and just being, even happy, let's just say it, with it, or in the aftermath, let's say, of, the diagnosis and all that.
One of the weirdest things for me when I was first diagnosed, and I have a a very good friend, and I just had this conversation with her. She was just diagnosed with a different cancer, esophageal cancer. And she called me and we were talking, and she said, I don't know how to deal with this. The people that are already processing my death when I am focused on living.
Wow.
And I remember that, right? The sorrow, the looks from other people. And it's true, when you have somebody who is close to you that is diagnosed with cancer, and especially if it's your sister or your daughter or someone really, really close, then mortality becomes a very apparent topic in your mind. It's something that you do start thinking on, not just the mortality of your loved one, but your own mortality, because if it could happen to them, and especially if you can't, with breast cancer, you can't point to something and say, well, if you hadn't have done X, you wouldn't have gotten Y. It doesn't work like that. And so, people saying to me, but this makes no sense. You eat organic, you work out all the time, you're fit. I don't understand how you could have this disease, how you could be stage 3B. And part of that is also them sort of processing the fact that no one is immune. It really can happen to any of us. And then unfortunately, it goes back to the thing I said in the beginning about how really the image we are shown when it comes to cancer is not one of life. It's one of walking a pathway to the end. And we're all doing that anyway, cancer or not. And there's just so much vibrancy that we miss out on by focusing on that.
I remember when I had my diagnosis in December, and I told first only a few people, and then I guess the larger, also I was employed, so I had to disclose it at work as well. And everyone around me was concerned and worried and frightened and scared. And I was just, I don't know if it's like a natural reaction of the body as well and of the mind, that you're kind of a little bit in denial or just not really aware. I don't know. But I was comforting people.
Right.
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So you could tell me more about this as well from your own experience, which was obviously more dramatic than mine, more intense.
I don't know about that. I will never compare. It's just, it is just such an interesting thing to kind of walk that path with people and kind of learn how to navigate those conversations. And not, I mean, people are not doing it with malicious intent. People say some of the silliest things like, oh, that's great, you're going to get a free boob job. Actually, that's not what it is, but thank you. And even now on the other side of it, people asking the very difficult question of, so are you cured? Because cancer is this kind of weird thing. And it's like, well, I feel good today. I have no idea. For all I know, there's something going on. And so it is this really a little bit of a mind, just, it could be a mind trap, right? But we're going to go with Mind Bloom because that's the podcast we're on. But, if you allow it to be that, it really can, because it also, there are those hidden gifts in cancer or in any diagnosis like this. And you can, and I will also say the human body is amazing to me. I was always amazed at how quickly my body would adapt to whatever trauma it just went through. But my mind required me to be present and process whatever it was that was going on. And also to be good about setting boundaries and not take on the burdens of everyone else's emotions, because to your point, I think it is a little bit instinctual. You were just put into fight or flight mode. You were just told you have cancer. You likely just said, oh my God, they just told me I'm going to die, because that's all of the images that we see. And so you pretty much go into survival mode and saying, what do I need to do? What do I need to know? What do I need to say? Who do I need to see? And that's just how you're thinking. You're so focused on how do I stay alive that you don't really have time to process, except for in those dark moments at night. We've all had them. Process that, imminent death thing that you may have in that first few seconds have felt.
Yeah. I mean, it's just these empathy misses, I think, from people around us. And it's not a blaming attitude that I'm having. It's just, it just happens, stems from fear as well. And it's interesting you're pinpointing that it's not just fear for us, the people who are sick, but it's for them. It's for their own death, for their own demise. And that is interesting. It's the instinct of self-preservation. You're just saying, oh my gosh, it is true. Yes, I'm in line, and something's gonna happen down the road as well to me as well. Yeah.
And I'm 49 now. And so, with or without cancer, the clock is still ticking.
Don't say that.
Well, it is. I mean, we're all death and taxes, right? Like we're all headed to the same place. And so, I think one of the gifts of cancer, and it took me a while to figure this out, even still, is that, take life really by the horns. Yeah. Take life and just maximize it. Live it intentionally. Get authentic with yourself. Ask yourself what brings joy. Is this really the job? Is this really the career? Is this, everything that you have, asking yourself, do I really want to do this today? And do I want to do this every day? And is this really the path? Or is there something I really should have done to maximize my life experience for me? And those are not selfish questions. The more joy-filled we are, the more joy we can give. And we're just all better people, right? And so cancer really brings that level of awareness. And I'll never forget, for the longest time, I would say to Griff, I feel like cancer broke me because I was so unhappy back in my career. Like I fought tooth and nail to get back up into six-figure executive role and got there and was absolutely miserable. And I would say, I feel like cancer broke me. Politics are annoying. I don't want to do the game playing. I don't want to, this doesn't appeal. And then like a 2x4 to the forehead, it was, well, why don't you take your MBA and your 25 years of experience and go work for yourself doing consulting, and then you don't have the politics. You don't have, right? And it was like, okay.
Yeah. You are met. I think what it is you are met with your worst fears, and turns out they're not that, bad after all. Right. And you're empowered with this immense strength. You can do anything. You can do anything. And I don't think I would have started a podcast before December. And then it only came to fruition after the pandemic or once it started, but definitely not before December. It is that empowering, which is ridiculous. And I hope it doesn't come back to bite me in the butt. But I struggled, and speaking of mental health, I struggled my whole adult life with fear of breast cancer, none other. Yeah. And just this panic disorder of, I have it, I can feel a lump. And indeed I did feel them, but it was just obviously an illness and a condition. And I was just overwhelmed by my thoughts and my invasive thoughts. But I lived with this fear my whole adult life. And it turns out, when it happens, it's like, okay, now I'm here in the present, and this is what the doctors are saying to me. And you know what? We can do this. And you put one foot in front of the other, and you wake up again the next morning, and again the next morning. Also, you read and you get informed, and you get it never is as hard as you imagine it. And I feel it's all this fear that populates our minds. And then when the worst case scenario hits, you can manage it. Also, I had become very educated in lots of tools for managing and coping with anxiety and depression and, OCD and all that amazing stuff. Yeah. So when it hits, you have tools at your disposal, and people around you also who know you very well and who will guide you as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I love about your podcast is really that focus on mental health, because I think there are two things when it comes to breast cancer that are not discussed enough. And these are things that I really try hard to bring over to my podcast. And as we were saying in what I call the green room, how our podcasts are so complementary in this way. But we do not talk enough about mental health. We also do not talk enough, in my opinion, about sexuality and sensuality post breast cancer. And there are a lot of, and they are tied together, because if you don't have that confidence, if you are not able to look at yourself and appreciate the beauty that you have, if when you look at yourself, it is instead triggering trauma, because PTSD is a very real thing for any cancer survivor. And as a woman, I will tell you, I mean, the first year was probably the worst, because going from being a triple D and having, quite frankly, a nice pair of breasts, yes, and having cleavage. And it's so funny because, and this is why I also want to talk about sexuality and sensuality on mine, because for the longest time, that has been defined externally, and it's been defined by markets and by men. Yeah. And so, looking at yourself and finding that beauty in yourself with where you are, and as you have healed, and learning to appreciate the beauty that is there, based on your definition, is so huge. Rebuilding your confidence is so huge. Dealing with the trauma triggers and the PTSD, scanxiety is a very real thing for any of us, right? Like, you go through that process, and every time you go to get a follow-up scan, you're like, oh, is it back? Is it worse? Is it somewhere else? Is it right? I think my first year, every weird itch, every weird pain, every whatever, I was certain it was metastasizing. And I was, so there's a lot to be said for that mental health element, sexuality, sensuality, and really becoming whole again. When we talk about breast cancer with doctors, or even in general, through most of the resources that are out there, it's very clinical. And I made the decision that in my podcast, I was going to refer to mastectomies as an amputation. And I did that consciously, because when we say bilateral mastectomy, it is this really nice, or unilateral mastectomy, we say mastectomy, is this very nice, clean, clinical word for what we go through, but it does not really impress upon people the trauma, physical trauma, let alone emotional trauma, that comes with that.
Absolutely.
And so that's sort of the other thing is, I had the episode that released just this week. I'm talking with another survivor who focuses on mental health. And we were talking about how when she had a unilateral mastectomy, and she did nipple grafting. So the one good nipple, she grafted to the other. And the bit that was omitted in that conversation with the doctor was that she would lose sensation in the nipple that was grafted. And that's one of those things where I want to make sure that as we tell these stories and provide this information, well, that we have a safe space to have the conversation, talk about the really real impacts of the decisions that we are making, and get the information and tell the stories, because really the women are the storytellers, those who have gone, and men, because I've known 3 men in my life who have had breast cancer. And to tell those stories and bring that information forward, and really, as we build our community, making sure that it's accessible to those, that we are honoring our elders in our
generation,
in our unique cluster of medicine, and that newbies who are entering this have access to the information and the resources and the stories and the knowledge, because it is a lonely place when you are first diagnosed, which is weird because you're surrounded by a ton of people, but it's still a very lonely place.
Mm. Yes. I was speaking yesterday with someone who said they had a double mastectomy at 27. They said, I'm now grappling with the fact that, I knew this, but I only am now, it's, settling in the fact that when I have a child, they will first obviously not breastfeed. That comes without saying, but I will not feel them when they're leaning against my chest, or I'm lying down and they're lying down on my chest. And it's those stories, definitely not for the sake of being a story, but it's those stories that I'd like to bring on. And people are like you and like this person and like so many others are, like are willing to enlighten this generation and this cluster, because it's not anymore like you're 40 and you're 45 and you should start doing your annual mammograms. No, you could be 25 years old, or you could be a man.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. And that is so huge too, because it's always amazing to me that, especially as I go through interviewing other women, the number of women that I talk to that, and I was the same way, like hindsight, I should have known that I would not have sensation in my chest based on the amount of trauma that was happening. I mean, they're scooping out your breast tissue. And yet it was so traumatic when my general surgeon unwrapped me and I looked down and I saw those staples, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is going to hurt so bad when he takes those out, only for him to take a couple out and me not even know he had been there. And that is burned into my memory, that I was not prepared for the loss of sensation. And you are going through and learning so much with your diagnosis and making so many decisions. And I don't necessarily blame providers, because, it's my first conversation ever about this, and it's his 10th conversation of the day about this. And so there's a bunch of assumed knowledge, but I really would love to see some better information sharing, especially in that regard. And especially since now they're able to do more with regard to nerve preservation and to actually kind of mitigate, not always, because every cancer is different, every body is different, but they do have new techniques now where they actually can preserve some of that sensation. And so having those conversations up front, and that takes us back to advocacy, right? Like how do we as women who have been there help those who are just coming to the club have the tools that are useful for them in helping them be able to advocate for themselves, and having the questions to know to ask, right? Like those things of, what do you wish you would have asked, or what do you wish you would have known? And there are so many, especially in the beginning. And when it's cancer, face it, a lot of us are like, just get it, just go, just take it, just whatever, just make it go away.
Yeah.
So.
And it's a quick process. Like you were saying, it's the train. Once you get on that train,
oh yeah,
it's a high-speed train. Yeah.
It is. It's interesting because I had the opportunity, the world, this sounds so weird to say. The stars were really aligned for me in getting this diagnosis. I was able to go to a cancer retreat at the retreat's called Harmony Hill, and it's in Union, Washington, and it offers free retreats to those who have been diagnosed with cancer, and in not just for the newbies. And there's couples retreats, and there's individual retreats, and there's all kinds of retreats. And I'm sure the retreats right now with COVID are probably on hold, but I was able to go to one, and it was before I'd had my mastectomies. And I had so much information coming at me, and I was feeling overwhelmed. And I'll never forget sitting in the group session with the doctor, and the doctor saying, you have time. It's okay for you to slow everything down. You've been living with cancer for years in order for you to be at this point where you have a mass that's palpable, or a mass of that size. It's okay if you need to take a breather to make your decisions. And I needed to hear that so badly. And that did allow me to take the time prior to my mastectomies to see a plastic surgeon so that I could make decisions on what kind of reconstruction it was that I wanted, so I could communicate that with my general surgeon. I actually think that's part of why I had good outcomes in my reconstruction, although it wasn't like immediate good outcomes. That one and done thing is pretty rare. But it was really useful. I was able to see the medical oncologist, the naturopathic oncologist, a radiation oncologist. I was able to get second opinions from everybody. And so it really helped me start to put together my team by taking a little control, advocating for myself and saying, no, I need to breathe. I need to make decisions. And one of the decisions was, do I do a unilateral or a bilateral? Because we knew there was cancer on one side. We didn't know if there was cancer on the other side.
In the other. Yeah. Yeah. And the likelihood is, with lobular especially, as we know. I want to try to make sense of something. I think you're going to help me. I'm going to quiz you. So on the one hand, there is this idea that we're both advocating against, almost this idea of the dying cancer patient, right? And I think against that is this new wave, I guess I will call it like that, of the #survivor and warrior and previvor and all of those empowerment, I guess, tools, and the pictures of naked chests showing the scars of surgery. I sometimes, because I'm very analytical and I live too much in my brain, maybe, but help me out here. I don't want to make it rosy, as in, look, I got surgery, I'm alive, I'm a warrior. You know what I mean? You know what I'm getting at? Right. No, it still implies a battery of psychiatrists and psychologists and good nutrition and, let's say, exercise and a good companion, a good oncologist. You know what I mean? It's very nuanced in the sense that it's also just not a pretty pic for Instagram. I just want to at all times pass a good sound message. That it's not easy as well.
I think that the difference for me, because I'll tell you, I am more bothered by the Pinktober advertising, where it's women who do not look well. In other words, and we don't, right? Like at various parts of this disease and in the treatments, you're not well. Yeah. You're not feeling well. You're not looking well. You're not looking your best. But what's always kind of annoyed me about that is that I'm being marketed that chemo should make me happy. I'm being marketed that, right? Like all of these things. And I went to, what's it called? Oh, it's the makeup thing, right? Shortly after I was diagnosed. And the person who was like, well, if you lose your lashes, then you can do the false lashes if you and making the point to all of us in the room that we owed it to everyone else and to our families to look the best that we could, because we shouldn't let them know how miserable we are.
Right. I mean, no.
And that lit me up, not in a positive way.
Absolutely.
Because if you're not feeling good, then don't pretend. Don't deny yourself. Don't be inauthentic. And so the difference for me, when a woman owns that hashtag, if she is claiming that in her path to reclamation, in her diagnosis, that is totally different. If she wants to say, I am feeling empowered and check this out, that I think is a wonderful, beautiful thing. And that does share that message of how you can be thriving in this disease. And it's an interesting thing because we all kind of have different preferences for the words that we like to use. I don't like the word survivor for me, because survivor to me says I survived it, I'm done. And that's not true. It could come back anytime. I don't like survivor because survive to me is almost like the minimum, right? Like, phew, survived that, right? And to me, I like thriver because thriver is one of those words that to me indicates the possibility. It just sort of, the word itself shares what possibilities are there. Warrior is one that I kind of go back and forth with. I don't mind the word warrior until somebody says this warrior lost their battle. And then that implies that they did something wrong, right? That they made a mistake along the way, and that is not true. And so I think that for all of us, especially as we are starting to openly discuss it. I mean, think about this. You have Facebook groups right now that will still take down pictures of 3D tattoo nipples because it's a nipple, right? Like we are just not supposed to talk about boobs or sex or mental health. And wow, well, breast cancer is like the trifecta right there of things we're not supposed to talk about. And so we're still claiming the language, and we're still sort of figuring out what works for us. And we're still coming up with ways to define it. I mean, come on, aesthetic flat closure. Like here we are, for how many years have we been doing mastectomies, and we're having to define what a aesthetic flat closure is to help providers understand what it is we want when we're done. We are still figuring out our glossary of terms for everything that it is that we are doing. But I'm also one of those that I just encourage women, whatever words feel right with you, right? Whatever resonates with you, those are the ones that you should own, and those are the ones you should use.
See, that was very helpful. I knew you'd help me figure this out because I'm still navigating, I've in this role for 2-3 months as Mind Bloom, and on social media as well. I mean, I had my own personal accounts, but I hardly ever went on there. Or if you do, it's like to post a picture of your puppy. It wasn't, this activism and advocacy was something that started very recently. So I'm just navigating these things, and I'm a champion for this speaking up, and showing up, and empowerment. But I just want to, and what you said was wonderful, because on the other hand, but it makes sense with what you were saying, is the individualism as well. I mean, you're free, obviously, to post whatever you want, because you'll also see, and that it feels empowering as well. And I know that because they write it sometimes, these women, they'll say, today I've had a shitty day.
Yep.
And today I threw up 4 times. And guess what? I'm still here, and I'm still here to tell the story, and I'm still telling you to check your boobs every month.
That's right. And it's funny, is the one I struggle most with personally is the F cancer. And it's not because F is a bad word. It's because, to me, and see, this is how personal it is. For some people, saying F cancer is absolutely empowering. To me, understanding that my immune system somewhere failed me, that my body failed me, but that it's my body. That because we all make cancer cells every day. Every person every day makes 200 to 300 cancer cells. Our immune system, when it's functioning, recognizes them, and those cells go through apoptosis. But when there's something that goes wrong, now we have zombie cells, and they're just proliferating. And for me, I could never say F cancer, because I felt like that's like saying F you.
Right. I see.
And so, but I would never, ever, to anyone else that is so empowered in that, and that is how they're communicating that they are owning this, and that cancer is not going to win. You go, girl, you go, guy.
Yeah.
That's totally like up to you and how you define it. What I love, I think, more than anything, Marina, is that we are defining it. That we're taking it ourselves, and we are saying, here's our language for our community on how we are going to communicate about our disease. And I love that.
Yeah. We could just end on that note. and just replay it. Just no, it is true. It really, that's exactly what it is. And the fact that we got a microphone and headphones and got this started in the first place after or in the wake of grueling times is it just speaks to this strength that we all, I guess, are carrying these days. I don't even know. I think we feed off of each other, and we just empower each other, and we just give each other purpose and meaning as well. It's been a discovery for me as well. This secret, not so secret club is a thing, is indeed a thing, and you just hit the nail in the head so beautifully there.
And it's such a cool crew to hang with. I mean, it is really amazing. There is something about having that awareness of your mortality brought to the forefront of your mind. We all know, like I said earlier, we all know we're all walking the same path. None of us knows what day or what time, and tragedies happen around us regularly. This crew, this amazing group of people who are survivors, they bring so much to the table in that awareness that there's so much more, I think, vitality, because every day is an opportunity to have your best day. And you realize that everything you've been sold about time, how time is money, time is whatever, like you realize time is your life. It is simply an exchange of moments. And you get very aware of whether or not you are spending your life on moments that bring you joy. Let's talk a little bit about self-advocacy.
Okay.
And I say that I think that is a really important topic based on just my own personal experience. When I noticed, and you have lobular, I have lobular, and there are so many different types of breast cancer. I know one of the things I'm desperately trying to do is find some researchers that to come on my show that'll talk to the specific type of cancer that they research, because until I was diagnosed, I had no idea that breast cancer was more than one type of thing, right? Like no clue. And then when I was diagnosed with lobular, to find out that that's, depending on which study, back when I was diagnosed, I think they said it was 7%. And just in some research I was doing last week, it's now 10% of cancers, of breast cancers, tend to be lobular. And so I had noticed that my nipple retracted and that my left breast had gotten slightly smaller. And when I say slightly smaller, if it wasn't me, you wouldn't be able to tell, right? Like if you weren't yourself, you probably wouldn't be able to tell. But the nipple being retracted was a very obvious one. And I had some slight skin puckering. I went months of noticing these changes and doing the exams. I had dense breast tissue, never felt a lump. Finally got to the point where I'm like, well, it's not staying static. It's still progressing. Like it's subtle, but there are still changes. So scheduled an appointment with a gynecologist, and he did the breast exam, steps back and says to me, and keep in mind, I'm 43. Was I 43? I was 43. And he says, well, I don't really feel anything. I don't, are you sure your nipple hasn't always been retracted?
Yes.
Okay. Gonna mansplain my nipples to me. I've only been living with him for 43 years, but yeah. So he and I had a little banter and fun because I am one of those people that will pretty much speak my mind. And he said, okay. Let me try again. And he did another exam and he stepped back and he said, maybe there's something at 3:00 under the nipple. I'll go ahead and order the mammogram and I'll order the ultrasound at the same time. That way, if there is anything, you don't have to wait. But that was the first step in having to advocate for myself in this process. Now, I went through, and lobular is a sneaky disease. You know this. I know this. lobular does not present the same way. It doesn't metastasize the same way. It is different in a world that is used to dealing with ductal.
Yeah.
And 5.5 years ago, that was very much the case. So had the mammogram, which thankfully he ordered for me because I was not of mammogram age yet. The mammogram, don't we all love this? Like, right? Like you go and they're like, oh, why don't you go ahead and leave your gown on for a minute?
I'm going to stick with that.
I think, the doctor, there was something he couldn't quite, we just need to do another angle. Like they're trying not to panic you, but you're like, I know what this means. Right. And then when they're like, well, we're going to need to do an ultrasound. You're like, great. Okay. Know what that means. And so went through all of that, went through the entire process of the MRI, which was a ton of fun with contrast, the biopsies, which were terribly painful, the stereotactic biopsy, which was horrible. And all along, they're estimating tumor size at about 1.3 to 1.6 centimeters. Pathology comes back post-operatively. And I'll never forget sitting down in my surgeon's office and him saying to me, well, we all thought we got it early and we didn't expect it to be this aggressive. Not what you want to hear. Long story short, it was over 6 centimeters of non-palpable mass. Had I not advocated, and this is sort of, I guess, the moral as I loop us back to self-advocacy.
Yeah.
If I had let the gynecologist plant that seed of doubt that maybe my nipple retracting was normal, and I waited for a mammogram, another 7 years if I had made it that long, I was stage 3B. None of my providers expected that. Stage 3B. If I had not advocated for myself, I may not actually be here.
Yeah.
So I always say to women, men, people, everybody, you are the resident expert. You literally live in your body and you have since birth. And if you feel like something is not right, then make noise until somebody listens. Thankfully, I didn't have to make a lot of noise. Thankfully, he acquiesced and sent me off. And thankfully, he ended up being a really, really good doctor in that process. But had I not advocated for myself, I don't even know what it would have looked like a year later.
Absolutely. Tammey, this was awesome. I don't know that we got good, that we covered anything we had planned. I haven't asked you one question. What makes your mind bloom?
Oh my goodness, we cannot forget that question. We would have to get back on if we had forgotten that question.
That would be terrible.
It would. Oh my gosh, we got so busy on other topics that I'm going to have to remember to ask you that when you're on my podcast.
You know what? I was you cannot use the poison on me. my own poison on myself.
What makes my mind bloom is really connecting and creating a safe space and doing the advocacy work that is just opening the conversation around breast cancer, making it free. I honestly, when I started my podcast, I talked with a podcast editor, love my podcast editor, Dan, at Roth Media. I have to give him a shout out. I just do. And he and I were talking and I'm like, can I say nipple on the air? Can I do I have and if you think about it, those are the taboos you mentioned at the beginning. We have these taboos and I just, want to free the conversation because this is so stinking important. And my mind, what makes my mind bloom is really bringing this advocacy to the forefront and creating this space. And whether it's through the podcast, whether it is through community, wherever it is, just making sure that we as women, as men, as people who have gone through this diagnosis are there for each other and able to have the free conversations about the really real conversations about breast cancer.
Thank you. And you are doing just that. You are. So thank you. And thank you for being my friend, my fellow podcaster. Yes. And just someone I look up to, and with so much strength. You said no to chemo. You said no to radiation. You are a champion for nutrition and good, healthy, hearty food. You're an awesome cook too, by the pictures, just from the pictures.
I only show you my best work.
Like the surgeons do.
Exactly.
You learn from the best.
That's right.
Yes. Well, it was beautiful. Awesome. I can't wait for next week when I'm going to be on yours. I'll have to do my homework and think, what makes my mind bloom?
That's right.
Why did I even come up with this question? Well, awesome. Thank you, Tammey. It was a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. And I love the podcast. Thank you so much for having me, Marina.
Of course.
And that was our episode for this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you were able to take away some useful tips and tools to use in your own life. Don't forget to subscribe to Mind Bloom the podcast anywhere you stream your podcasts, and please leave a message on the Anchor FM voicemail if you have any questions or comments for me. Also, please leave a review on the Apple Podcasts app. That would help the podcast reach more people. That would be great. Follow Mind Bloom on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at MindBloomU, and check out my website, mindbloomu.com. Don't forget, a new episode every Tuesday. I look forward to spending time with you again next week. Be well and stay blessed. Bye-bye.